Hey, welcome back to another episode of Parker's Pensies. I'm your host, Parker Sedekase, and this is a podcast where we explore all the deepest ideas in philosophy, theology, nature, and life. I love thinking about cool stuff, so come think with me. Today's episode is very, very special. I have with me Dr. Jacob Allee from the Substack Study the Great Books. I'm getting that right. Yeah. Uh, I love this dude. I love his thoughts, and I'm always liking his stuff on Substack. So I figured it'd be really fun to have an extended conversation here. We're going to be talking about Robert Heinlein's Starship Troopers, the philosophy therein. Maybe we'll talk about how it relates to the horrible movie and what it means to be a man, especially from this part of Heinlein's life and work. So I'm excited for it. It's going to be really, really fun. Before we jump in, I want to thank everyone who's making this podcast happen over on Patreon and YouTube members. If you guys like this show, then please consider supporting your boy there, helping me buy dog food and diapers and all that good stuff. There's a lot of ways you can support, a lot of merch, all that stuff. Check it out. Links in the description. I don't want to commodify myself too much here. Let's jump in with Jacob Allee and let's start chopping up Starship Troopers. Jacob, thanks so much for coming on the podcast, man.
Yeah, thanks for asking.
Yeah. Before we get into the stuff on Heinlein, I wanted to talk about your project, Study the Great Books. When did you start this, and yeah, why'd you start it?
Yeah, it kind of started organically, I guess, about 3 or 3.5 years ago. Really, it started off with just kind of as a teacher. I've taught in classical Christian schools for 10 or 11 years now. And so just kind of shared some of the things I do in my classroom, the kind of assignments that I'd write, and the way I would study a book, and so on and so forth. And I got encouragement from some friends to, check out this platform called Substack, and that I thought people would like, some of the stuff I was doing. And so I thought, okay, yeah, why not? And at first I didn't have any great big intentions about it, but as I got more and more positive feedback, I got, a bigger mind for what I could do with it. And having taught for, like I said, quite a while, and also having homeschooled classically my own kids even earlier than that. Um, you know, I really was under the conviction that I wanted to make a curriculum. And I had taught in history and literature and logic and comp and rhetoric, and I've used a lot of different curriculums over the years. And I just think that I have seen ways that I could build on the good work that's already been done and kind of offer something new that maybe goes a little further in some areas and ways that haven't been done before. So that's the
Yeah,
project. Study Great Books is a place to talk about great books and think about books and study books, but also in the process of making a complete 7th through 12th grade integrated humanities curriculum.
that's awesome. Yeah, I love that. Do you have any strong opinions on which set of books is greater, whether it's like the Harvard classics, whether it's like Mortimer Adler's, Britannica? Is one greater than the other, or maybe some third one?
I have an affection for Mortimer Adler's
Okay.
that way. Like,
Yeah,
I
me
don't know
too.
if I want to weigh in and say one is like superior to the other
Okay.
necessarily, but I'm most familiar with Adler's approach, and a big appreciator of his approach and studying not only the great books but the great ideas in the
Yeah.
great books. And the Syntopicon. So if you own a set of the
Right
great
here.
books of the
Yep.
Western world, yeah, yeah, the first 2 volumes, well, in the 1990 edition, it's the first 2 volumes. I think in the one you have back there, it might be the volume 2 and 3. But,
That's right. Yep.
anyway, it's basically just, an index for the great ideas and everywhere you can read throughout that entire set about the ideas. So if you want to study some particular aspect of war, or civilization or religion or whatever it may be, it's a guided tour through the greatest minds of history. And so for that reason, if nothing else, like, definitely lean that direction and prefer that. They might have something, I don't know, similar to that in the Harvard set. I'm not sure,
Mm.
but it's what I know best. It's what I fell in love with first. And so it wins in my heart.
That's awesome. That's good to hear. Yeah, the Syntopicon changed my life. I love that book so much. And even like each essay is fantastic, but also even for folks who are making commonplace books, like just take those great ideas and make those into your commonplaces in your commonplace book, and you'll set yourself up to find and store really awesome quotes on the good and justice and man and all sorts of good stuff. So that's awesome.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Can you tell us a little bit about what it looks like to get a PhD in the humanities? So I have a lot of theologians and philosophers who come on. So I'm pretty familiar with that, but I'm not sure as much about this adjacent field that probably can look like either one or both or neither.
Yeah. Yeah. So I just to give you a little bit of background, like I did my bachelor's degree in religion and apologetics, and I did a master's in biblical studies. And so initially, when I was looking to do a doctorate, I was looking in the area of theology and apologetics because that was kind of my go-to.
Mhm.
But I had the necessity of finding. I wanted a fully accredited program, but I had to be able to do it from a distance,
Mhm.
and so that narrowed down to just 4 or 5 programs, and several of them were theology and apologetics. Looked at liberty and other things, like that. But this one caught my eye, and it stood out to me as a unique way of studying things that would allow me to both do kind of what I was interested in and also maybe kind of bridge out some new areas and horizons and things like
Mm.
that. And so, yeah, it was really just kind of God's providential grace that led me to Faulkner University to do the PhD in humanities, which is a great books program.
Okay.
And so the Mortimer Adler set, it's not all that they read in that program by any means, but it kind of has an underlying current in the program.
Mm.
And so it is a liberal arts program. So you are doing classes and readings in history and literature. You're doing readings in the maths and sciences through the great books as well. And so it's very broad, which sometimes, you run into some people who say, well, that's just not a PhD. A PhD is extremely narrow focused, laser
Mm.
focused. And I get that and I respect that. I get that's a way most PhD programs are, but I actually love the fact that this program was about becoming conversant with the way all of the disciplines speak to each other. And I
Mhm.
think that's the thing that's unique about it, right? Is seeing how math, science, history, literature, composition, logic, all of these things aren't separate disciplines,
Right.
right? They're actually there's a unity in all of them. And so that's I would say that's in a nutshell, that's what that program is about, or what studying the humanities and the liberal arts is about, is the unity and the diversity of all those things.
Mhm.
And then, yes, for a dissertation, you pick a more specific area and dive in headlong and go for it. So
Yeah. That's so cool. I mean, in my head, it's like that is what a philosophy PhD ought to do because everything the PhD is a doctorate of philosophy of whatever you're getting in. So if it's like a doctorate of the philosophy of philosophy, it should be able to see how all these things hang together. But yeah, in the Anglo America, it's analytic, and so it has to be like only 3 people can understand this in the whole world. So I'm definitely
yeah, and I
partial.
think honestly, I just think I'm better off for this program personally. I'm not saying it's not a wonderful thing to go in
Yeah.
those kind of like esoteric dives where you have two other people that can understand you, but at the same time, I think there's a lot of value in learning to be able to speak to everybody, and be able to relate to everybody and what they do in different fields of research.
Totally.
It's pretty fun.
Yeah, I love it. So maybe last personal question here. Can I ask about your denomination? Where do you find yourself nowadays?
Yeah, I attend a Presbyterian church, it's a Reformation Presbyterian church in
Cool.
Apache Junction, very conservative Presbyterian. And we actually, so we are, I don't know whether this wins me or loses me credit, but I'll just tell you what it is. We were OPC, but we have recently detached from the OPC and are going into the CREC.
Mm.
So I know there's lots of feelings around the CREC. Some people have, but
Yeah, yeah.
but
Someone
I
might
love
say
our
it in the comments,
church,
but
and
yeah, that's awesome.
we love God, and we love the scriptures, and that's where we are.
Amen, dude. That's cool. That's really cool. I'm a EFCA dude who has I got stuck in this rut of just only reading OPC guys for years and years and years, and then made it out into Bavink and then back into others. But Yeah, so that's a little my backstory. So jumping in with Starship Troopers, man, you've been writing about this, or at least you have all these study guides, tons and tons of study guides for each chapter of the book, which is fantastic, and a really nice intro overview to the book. But you're writing about it on your Substack, Study the Great Books. So I got to ask, like, is Starship Troopers one of the great books for you?
Yeah, I've gotten it's interesting actually. Yeah, this book, like no other, I have gotten both flack for including and daring to even like mention it on a site called Study the Great Books. But I've also gotten people who literally came out of the woodworks and thanked me for doing this book. Like it was
Mm,
really kind of fascinating. Um, One person who was particularly snarky with me about the idea of including this in my curriculum, I just responded to I say, well, study all the books that are worth reading is more of a mouthful. And
yeah, I
so,
did see that. Yeah,
uh,
that's
you
good.
know, I would say I was talking to someone actually at my church just the other day about this book, and they were kind of asking along the same lines, and I just said, I consider this book great books adjacent.
Mm,
I mean, there are a number of books in the curriculum that I'm building that I would not say they are great books in the sense of Homer or Dostoevsky or Shakespeare or anything like that, but they are books that are meaningfully conversant with the great ideas
mm,
and meaningfully conversant with some of the great thinkers of those great ideas and interact with them so as to tell a great story that is engaging, but might also awaken in the heart of a reader a desire to know more.
mm.
And so I feel like that's the place that this book and several others like it that I will do study guides for kind of falls in that category of it's great books adjacent. It calls readers, especially young readers or readers who might not typically read one of the great book canon books, right?
Right.
Uh, but they get introduced to some of these ideas that get explored much deeper in other places, but might entice them. So
Yeah. I really like that great books adjacent. I also like being conversant with the great ideas. I think that's a really good curriculum for an author who wants to write a good book. Like, yeah, be conversant with some of those, but throw some of those in there and have yeah, good dialogue around them and maybe even inject in some good takes on them, which would be huge. Why'd you pick this now, I guess? It's more recent. Were you rereading it or had you read it, as a teenager or what's the deal with that?
I didn't read as a teenager. In fact, all I think I read as a teenager were Goosebumps by R.L. Stine. Um,
That's funny. So I grew up in the EFCA church, man. We weren't allowed to do that kind of stuff. It was like Harry Potter
yeah,
no, Goosebumps no. That's funny.
right,
Bible
right, right,
man,
right.
yeah.
And I don't need to go way off on this tangent, but no, I was actually so I wasn't much of a reader as a young person. I became a Christian when I was 15, and so I became a reader of the Bible pretty intensely. And then I was all passionate about theology and then philosophy and defense of the faith, right? Like
Sure.
so for probably most of my 20s, I just read theology and philosophy, period. That's all I read. And I was not a fiction reader. I was kind of one of those guys who would have told you that's probably a waste of your time when you can be reading things that matter, you know?
Yeah. Mm,
Um, and it actually wasn't until for a class I had to read a book called The Death of Ivan Ilyich, that I was just rocked and convinced that I had been missing out on so much. That
mhm,
fiction has this power to tell us true things, even in a way that more didactic, like straightforward kind of teaching just can't.
yeah.
So Tolstoy just wrecked me on that. And anyway, so but all that to say, like, no, I didn't read this as a kid. I didn't read this as a teenager. I didn't read this until I was in my 30s. And I instantly I loved it. And then, as I've just dwelt on it over the years and come back to it a couple times, I thought this would be a fitting book, I think, to put in the curriculum to kind of, especially to grab the hearts and minds of some of the boys in classical Christian schools who
Mm,
maybe have a harder time connecting with some of the other books that we get them to read. And so just like I said, kind of hopefully a gateway for some of them to have a great story, but want more of some of the ideas that get brought up in it too.
yeah.
So
That makes a lot of sense. So I was pretty reluctant to read this because I had started with Stranger in the Strange Land and just hated the book. I know some people really like it, but I kept waiting for like a turn at the end where you realize that maybe just hippie sex isn't going to save the world. And actually, here's a better lesson. And it never came. So I was like, dude, what is wrong with this like horny old man? What is the deal? Um, and so when I saw you going through it, I was like, okay, this is a good opportunity to make myself go in because I heard it's much different and much different philosophy and stuff like that. Have you read any of his other stuff, Stranger in Strange Land or The Moon is a Harsh Mistress?
I have to admit that, like, I actually have read, like, no other Heinlein. Like, I have a couple on my list to read. I picked up not very long ago, How Spacesuit Will Travel. I've heard that's a
Mm-hmm.
one I need to read, you know? But, no, I haven't, and I've been told by others, "Hey, some of his later stuff especially, like, it's kinda raunchy," you know?
Yeah, it's wild. Yeah.
And but, all I have to go off is this book. This is
Mm,
Heinlein for me,
yeah.
and yeah, it's worthy, I think, so.
Yeah. So, you'd mentioned the movie in one of your posts, and you're like, "Hey, look, it's not even worth it." Have you seen the movie yourself?
Yeah, I watched that as a teenager.
Yeah, me too. Yeah. Yeah, do you I mean, without maybe you didn't do a lot of research on that or anything like that, but what is the deal? From what I've heard, the director was like, I haven't read the book. I'm just gonna lampoon from what I've heard of the book or something like that." Wait, what do you know about that?
Yeah, yeah, so the director for the movie, maybe the producer or both, I'm not sure exactly, but, kinda set it as their goal to invert the actual main message of the book.
Mm,
They felt that the book was a fascist piece of rhetoric, like it was trying to, persuade people to have a all too high view of the state and loyalty to the state and strong military, governments and all this kind of thing,
yeah,
and so in kind of a protest to what they perceived to be the primary message of Starship Troopers, they basically made a mock comedy of the book. And so they actually they portray the Federation as in very Nazi-like colors, black and red, and like, just kind of the icons of their flags. They look very Third Reichish,
mm,
and then they just kind of make a mockery out of it, just being over the top, like goofy, zany things that happen, and even a level of egalitarianism that's just unhealthy and bizarre,
yeah,
And so, the humorous thing, I guess, I mean, the movie's trash. I wouldn't recommend it to anybody,
yeah.
But the funny thing is that it actually got kind of cult following, and probably made more people read the book,
Oh, that's a good point. That's hilarious. I didn't think about that. They're probably yeah, if they love the movie, they're probably so disappointed in the book. Or maybe it changed their
So
mind. Yeah, maybe it converted them over. Hmm. Yeah, that's hilarious. Well, okay, so you mentioned the main message of the book. What would you take to be the main message of Starship Troopers?
yeah, and so, I mean, in one sense, like, the critique, that I just mentioned has some validity to it, right? I mean, there's no doubt that Heinlein is, in some degree critiquing, the military as he knew it in his own contemporary day, and what he thought would be a better way, and certainly, does have a strong view of the concept of, um, citizenship and who should get to be a citizen, and kind of, pushing back against birthright citizenship, or, being just born there, then you're a citizen kind of thing, Um, but although I think that's it's a strong thread throughout the book, I really think first and foremost, this is a book about a boy learning to be a man.
Mhm.
And it's a thread also about coming to have appreciation and gratefulness for the many people it takes in one person's life to become a man. And I think you see that at the very last of the book, towards I think either the second or to last or very last chapter. He's kind of reflecting on where he's made it to, and one of his fellow soldiers, they're splitting ways, and he says, like, "Good luck to our." Or no, he says, "You have all the luck." That's what he says. "You have all the luck." And he thinks to himself, I think in some sense, like that's true, but it's not so much luck, it's people.
Mm,
And he reflects on the teachers he's had and the mentors he's had and the parents he's had and realizes that who he is because of all of them, right?
yeah.
And so I think that's the main theme of the book. There are many important and interesting you know, side themes or, just off to the side that are worth considering as well. But that's the thing that I think stands out most is this young man who starts off with no clue who he is or who he should be, and all of the many people who have a hand in helping him find what it means to be a man.
Yeah. And I love that message because I think actually how boys become men is having not just one figure, because then you get kinda cult-like and weird, and that person passes away or leaves you and your whole world's collapsed, but it's like a fellowship, a community of men who kind of are already there calling you up into manhood. And, maybe that's just my picture. I wrestled since 1st grade, so all the men in my life were, wrestling coaches, like my dad, my brothers who wrestled, and then everyone else I looked up to were wrestling coaches, and it was just like they were all, Charlie Zim, all of them. And so they would beat up on you. There's this passage in there, uh, where I forgot his name, one of the recruits is, they're in the camp, and he punches Zim, and he's not supposed to, and Zim wasn't gonna say anything about it, and you find out later that it was actually Zim is blaming himself because he's like, "I should have been on guard. I should have never let him I should have
Yeah,
knocked him out before," because now he's in trouble, and now he gets whipped and kicked out. But, um, the idea he was like, "He hit me first," and the commanding officer was like, "That doesn't mean anything. This is not, you're not out there in the world, you're here in the army, and
yeah,
they can put hands on you." I felt that my entire life because the wrestling coaches could put hands on you. They would snap your face into the mat. So much of what you've said in your post about how this will resonate with you. It's like, dude, this is my life. This is my experience. I love this.
yeah, yeah. No, I think that that is a great scene, a moment of maturation for the main character. Because he reflects on that moment too. On he's like, I just had breakfast with that guy this morning, right? Like here
Yeah.
he is, and he's pretty sure he's actually gonna get hanged for that, right? Like
Mhm.
he thinks that's what's about to happen to him. And he could have been had it not been kind of for the hard mercy of his captain, right? Who calls a field court martial instead of a full court martial, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, it is. Yeah, it's just one of the many lessons in that book, and it is interesting because I certainly haven't been in the military, and I can at first like when I think when I first read the book like kind of relate almost to the guy saying, "Well, he hit me first. Like this doesn't seem fair. Like you shouldn't be able to lay hands on me, But
Mhm.
maturity is realizing that there are different situations, there are different places and times where the normal expectation, right, is set aside, and you're in a different place and you have to be able to act accordingly, right?
Yeah.
And certainly military service is a good example of that, where some of your normal rights to not have somebody lay hands on you, at least under certain conditions, right, is you sign that away, So
Yeah.
yeah,
Even that expression I love so much. I think I first encountered that in scripture. Man, where is somewhere I will lay hands on you. I wish I knew the quote right now, but the expression of laying hands on you is like so masculine and manly. I love it. It's just, hey, you
yeah,
better watch out. Like I'm gonna if you don't stop what you're doing, I'm gonna lay hands on you. You need to stop that.
right,
I love that expression, and the fact that that was brought in was another one that's just like, man, this is super cool for me. Being someone, so I'm a younger millennial, born in '91. And with that, I have a deep ingrained sense of irony, and I don't know if you wanna call it postmodernism or what, but we it's hard for us to see straight up stories of good and evil, and, this is probably like I don't know how to say it, but a Bildungsroman, maybe this is like a coming of age story, and to not see good be called evil and evil called good is weird. It's a little odd. So seeing that, like, Charlie Zim wasn't just some evil guy after all, but that he actually was super noble and was taking all the blame for
yeah,
himself. You kept wait I kept waiting for the shoe to drop or whatever. It's that, oh, well, he's actually bad, but look at how dark his shadow really is. And it just didn't happen. And I'm like, that's different. He's writing, probably in the 50s. I think it came out in 59. So it's like just a different view on the world that was a little bit unique for me coming, in my social location, which is so terrible today.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because in that scene, I think it's Ted Hendrick, I think is the name of the guy that gets whipped
Oh,
to
yeah,
start
that's
out in the
right.
military, right? Um, but, Johnny relates that, he later then hears a conversation between Zim and, uh, Captain, I can't think of his name at the moment, but his commanding officer, and that's where, yeah, you hear them basically like, "This is my fault," and Cap's like, "Yeah, it is your fault. Don't ever let it
Mhm.
happen again," But what he overhears is like the human side
Mm.
of his sergeant, right? That he didn't think existed, And I thought it was really interesting because in the book, that's the thing that almost makes Johnny wash out. Like
Mhm.
that's the thing where Johnny goes, if Zim can screw up, anybody can screw up, and I should just get the heck out of here. So he's pretty much made up his mind that he's going to leave before something changes his course, right? But the thing that struck me as so interesting about that is I felt like, and maybe it'd be different if I'd gone through all of Johnny's experiences, of course, but I felt like that would be the thing that make me stay.
Mm.
Like, that's the thing that, like seeing, oh, my sergeant is a human person. My sergeant actually cares about me and all these other guys. And you know what I mean? Like that would, in my mind, that would have a completely different effect on me than it seemed to have on Johnny in the story. So that's always stood out.
Yeah. I'm with you there. I think, seeing that humanity, oh, man, it would be so different if it was written today, where the humanity aspect would make him, it would make Zim soft.
Mm.
He'd be weeping or something, and you'd be like, "Oh, look, he's a real person." But instead, he just dives in deeper into duty and honor and valor, owning it himself, and it's kind of, I don't wanna make anyone cringe too hard or anything, but it's like the Jocko Willink, if you're familiar with him, type, like, uh, extreme ownership of, "Hey, look, yeah, it was this guy's fault kind of, but if I was doing my job better, I wouldn't even let him swing on me. So it is my fault." And then, his superior is saying it's his fault because he didn't catch that maybe he was slowing down or something like that, and or at least just saying that, yeah, the buck does stop with me and it happened under my in my platoon. So just seeing that even the way you write humanity back then was different than you do it today when you take a peek in and you show how squishball people are and how soft they are, which whatever, dude, you guys can cry in the right appropriate situation, but
Yeah.
it not one, I think. So that
Yep.
was really cool, a little cool insight to see. The thing that stops him from washing out is that letter from, I'm gonna say Dubois, but it might be like Dubois. I had a athletic
Yeah, it's
trainer who,
Dubois.
that's like the French way to say it, and I had this athletic trainer, and he's like, "Yeah, my last name's Dubois," and I'm like, "Dude, you're an athletic trainer
But you're like,
for
no,
co."
it's not, dude.
Yeah, yeah, you're a athletic trainer for a college wrestling team. You're gonna you need to say Dubois, man, that's tough. So Dubois is his high school teacher, the only class I think that you have to take, you can take it as elective, pass, fail, or it's all pass, but, it's history and moral philosophy. This was one where my my hackles were up because 'cause I'm like, it looks like he's a good guy. He wrote, to Johnny and encouraged him at a time when he really, really needed it. But I can't help thinking, like, is this guy like an undercover recruiter that's, like, pushing people, tricking them into applying, like, teasing them, saying, like, "You couldn't," because it says he continually says, "You can't muster it," and stuff like that, and I'm wondering your thoughts on that, if that's just him being really proud to be who he is and to have served and see, actually, you guys are all soft and you wouldn't make it through anyways, or is he, like, secretly undercover recruiting, and is it kinda nefarious?
I definitely don't see it as nefarious. I I I think Colonel Dubois is a man of conviction that really believes what he says, and he has a strong and high view of citizenship, or what they call sovereign franchise, which involves the ability to vote, which again, not everybody has. You have to be a citizen, and you have to get to become a citizen through federal service, right? And so I
Mm,
think he really believes that their system is good and right, and that only people who are willing to make the sacrifice and at least have the possibility of even laying down their lives should have the right to make those kind of critical decisions of leadership for a people, for a nation or a federation, as it may be in this case. And so I really think Dubois is just telling these young people what he thinks. And I think he's genuinely kind of disgusted
Hmm.
that the general populace has no idea of concepts of virtue, sacrifice. They're living off of the capital of men who do know those things and have believed those things and have paid the ultimate price. And so he doesn't have a lot of patience sometimes for um, dumb kids from dumb families who have too much money and you know
Yeah.
things like that. Um, so I think that he's a sincere guy in the sense that he tells them what he believes and he hopes that it will actually get through to someone. And when it does, he couldn't be more pleased, you
Mm.
know? And so I think, the humorous thing in all of that really is that Johnny didn't go into the military because he got the lesson.
I know. Yeah. Yeah.
He went in because his friend went, and then he went in because he does have a moment. I mean, I'll give him this credit, like he
Yeah.
has a moment where he says to himself, Am I, am all, is all I am a rich kid who's going to inherit the family business and have everything given to me on a silver platter,
Yeah.
And he kind of realized, like, if I don't do this, I'll never know if I'm anything more, right? And so that's his that's the virtue that wells up in Johnny that officially pushes him over the edge to go through with signing up, But all that to say, when Dubois, of course, knows that Johnny is in boot camp and has been in there for a long time, and he's stuck it out past the point which he thinks is going to be his comp, where he's no longer considering quitting or likely to be tossed out or anything like that. I think he writes him to tell him just genuinely, like, I'm proud of you, right?
Mm.
Because you're one of very few people in all of the classes I've taught of history and moral philosophy that took any part of that to heart.
Mm.
So I think it is very sincere. I don't think there's anything, and I don't think he's even secretly recruiting in the sense of like it's some sort of, nefarious plan and reverse psychology kind of methodology. Like, his dad kind of insinuates that too. But he's
Right.
like, when he asked Johnny, do you know how to lead a pig? But again, I just don't think that's it. I don't think he's trying to trick anybody. In fact, I think every step of the way, people like Colonel Dubois and the recruiter up front at the federal
Yeah.
building, they're doing everything they can to discourage people from signing up for this. The only people who should make it through are people who really have some conviction that I need this, that it's what's best. So,
Yeah. Yeah. I kept thinking like it's just the way I grew up and like the stories that I've heard. They would all be nefarious and they'd all be some
yeah,
huge conspiracy that's like tricking kids into giving up their
right.
futures. So yeah,
Yeah, it's
it
not a
is.
dystopian novel, right? Like it's not the
That's
Hunger
right.
Games or something like that where president was messing with people
Right.
or yeah.
Yeah. Which is okay. So this book's really cool too. I've been getting in deeper and deeper into science fiction lately. Writing my own novel, so I'm like, let me read a bunch more so I don't step on any overused tropes or something like that, and maybe get inspired. But this, if you read anything about any kind of secondary literature on it, it's like everything is just a conversation with Heinlein about Starship Troopers. All these, all these military science fiction. It's like a whole subgenre of science fiction now. One of my favorite movies, The Edge of Tomorrow with Tom Cruise. It's like,
Okay.
yeah, this is definitely in reaction to this. You can see the drop is happening the same. The big mechanical suits, um, the alien creatures. In my head, I'm like, that might be the better rendition of Starship Troopers than Starship Troopers the movie, which was just
Yeah.
horrible.
Yeah, and I
So
think
it's
Halo
cool.
also the video game series
I never
is
thought about
also
that.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Specifically, there's I'll show you a couple kind of nerd I am. But Halo
Mhm.
3 ODST, right? The orbital dropship troopers, right? Like that one
Yeah.
is just straight out of this,
Mm,
and
that's
um,
good.
very cool.
That's good. People are gonna love that one. Yeah, that's a good reference, man. Um, what so maybe when you're making curriculum for Study the Great Books, is this curriculum in the abstract that's like, "Hey, I made this, you can use it for yourself and for your children," or are you also using this in teaching maybe your own kids or at a classical Christian school?
Yeah, so I'm the dean at Caritas Academy in Chandler, Arizona.
Nice.
And basically everything that you're seeing on there, we're teaching at our school here. And so
Okay.
it's, which is great, because it gets trial run tested, and
Yeah.
I know that it works, right? I know that it's effective to use in the classroom. I think it's just as effective to use for private individual study. I also use material that I've made to do book clubs. I've got a book club right now, actually going through Starship Troopers as it turned out. And So yeah, like it's versatile and it works well. And it allows me to find any bugs in the system too while I'm kind of testing it out. So
Yeah, that's huge. So, you said it's a classical, is it a classical Christian school?
it is, yeah.
Okay, cool. So when you're talking to young, probably adolescent or near their, boys about this book, and they're reading it and learning, hopefully catching fire for, what it means to be a man, what are some things that you think Starship Troopers gets wrong that you might, from a Christian perspective, say, "Not quite," "He's a great author, but he wasn't a Christian. Here's how he missed the mark." If anything, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a lot of strong critiques on that front because I think a lot of the practical advice, so to speak, that comes to this book is fairly sound, in a lot of cases.
Mm,
There is an underlying current of Darwinist kind of philosophy in the book,
mhm.
and there's definitely an underlying current also of kind of a syncretism, like all religions are, good enough,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And so, like, those are some of the things that, we pull out and talk about, but again, they don't most of that doesn't really touch, like, the parts of the book that are really about just taking responsibility, with the exception, I guess, that there is, again, just kind of the Darwinist part kinda gets into some discussions when it kind of flashes back to history and moral philosophy classes with, Mr. Dubois, and just kind of the assumptions about why certain kind of discipline works. It's
Mhm.
all just like a mechanism of uh, kind of these Darwinistic like pain receivers. That's what makes you behave the way you should. And of course, there's discussion too that really outright says that there are no human rights. Like that's
Mm,
one like there's duties, but there's not rights. And so which again like I as a teacher at a classical Christian school, I love this book having those kind of things in there
yeah.
because it gives us an opportunity to really discuss that and think about that and compare and contrast that to, what our founding fathers as Americans said and what does scripture say and how does the Imago Dei, like apply to this and so we really get to analyze all those kind of things. And so it's actually wonderful for that very same reason. But those kind of underlying assumptions are there and need to be seen and addressed and talked about. But again, just on the most practical, pragmatic level, we might disagree. I might disagree with Heinlein's kind of view that leads him to certain conclusions, but I less often disagree with the conclusions as much as I
Mm,
disagree with how he got there.
sure.
And it's just kind of like, when I read Marcus Aurelius or something like that in Meditations, Stoic philosophy, for instance, has a lot of places of commonality with Christian like ethics and philosophy.
Yeah.
Now there are major departure points here and there, but there's all that to say, like you could just say because of God's natural grace to people, they sometimes come to truth even though they came at it the wrong way, and things like that. So that's I'd say there's some of that in the book.
Yeah, yeah, I totally agree. I like the point you made about being happy that there's things, at least some points of contention that you can bring up and use as teaching. For whatever reason, like the fundies, the more fundamental Christians, fundamentalist, and the fundamentalists within evangelicalism, they think you can't read stuff that you disagree with, and it somehow taints you. And it's like this really weird passive view on the self that it's like, "Oh, that's gonna corrupt you and that's gonna lead you astray." It's like, well, you should study some grammar and logic and rhetoric. Maybe you do need to weaponize your mind a little bit more because if that's what you think, then you can't read anything. That's crazy. But I don't know. Have you had any experience with that kind of mentality in Western Christendom at all?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I remember, the first time I remember kind of encountering that, directly, I was a teenager. I was, attending a church, at that time I was non-denominational, kinda charismatic, but I was at a church, I was at lunch with, I think, one of the pastors, like the youth pastor, and another guy from our church. We were all just chatting at a Fuddruckers, and but this other guy starts talking about how, like, the Bible is the only book you read, period. He will
Mm,
not read any other book. Every other book's a waste of time, and, he knows that the ideas in this book are good and right and, like, safe, and there's he doesn't wanna get infected by other ideas, which, as probably like a 16-year-old at the time, like, I thought, like, I mean, that kind of makes sense, but I also felt like something didn't seem right about it, but I didn't have the
mm.
tools
Yeah, what about Lord of
to
the
parse
Rings,
that
right? Like,
out.
at
Like,
least yeah,
just,
yeah,
I don't know, it seemed extreme no matter what
sure.
else I would say about it.
Yeah.
Um, but what it is, like, that comes down to just it's fear.
Mhm,
In my opinion, it's fear, that maybe you are too weak to handle that, as an individual, and but I think maybe even greater than that, it's a fear that somebody else might be right.
mhm.
And I
Yeah.
and one of the things I tell my students all the time, and I'm a big apologetics guy. I have, and I'm not trying to be braggy here, but I've just spent like hours and hours and hours and hours thinking about these things and reading books and reading other religious texts and all kinds of stuff. So I've spent more time than most people, like, on some of these big questions. And I tell people all the time, I tell my students, look, I want to believe what's true, period.
Mhm,
And if Islam is true, I want to be a Muslim. If Mormonism is true, I want to be a Mormon, right? If atheism is true, I want to be an atheist.
mhm.
And I think if you don't believe that, you're insincere in what you do believe.
Yeah.
But here's the really good news, right? Is that the truth lies completely 100% in the Christian camp. Like Jesus Christ is the Lord of history who died and rose from the dead in the first century. The evidence for the reliability of the Bible and the truth of its claims is embarrassingly good, right?
Mm,
And the problem that I think most people have is they haven't read enough, and so they're scared.
yeah.
They haven't talked to enough people, and so they're scared, right? But the truth of the matter is that Christianity has all of the intellectual goods.
Mm,
It's unparalleled. And on my worst day of doubt, all I have to do is think about the contrary positions and realize how much better ground I'm standing
mm,
on where I'm at already, you know?
yeah.
And so that's what I would say about that. We need we need to be challenged. We need to be able to see what other people believe and why they believe it. And I think contrary to what most people think is that, well, that might draw you off, that might lead somebody astray. I think if you do it carefully, systematically, and with sincerity, you'll actually become a much stronger, more confident Christian.
Yeah.
Uh, so intellectual honesty always leads to Jesus Christ.
Mm, that's good. That's a good word. I had a I felt that same kind of nervousness and, just being scared of being proven wrong, of finding out the wrong thing, and then, "Oh, no, there goes my faith." I wouldn't even ask pastors hard questions when I was growing up because I didn't want to blow up their faith. I was scared that, like, if I ask you the wrong question and that happens to you, then the whole congregation's mad at me because we don't have a pastor anymore. And it wasn't
Right.
until college where living with, one of my best friends, on my wrestling team as well, and just a super skeptic, just like, "Why do you believe this?" I was involved in campus ministry. He's like, "Why are you going there? What are you doing this?" And I had like classic evangelical goofy answers. But then I'd run back to my room and I'd grab a book on apologetics and start reading that. And that led to
Yeah.
degrees in philosophy and theology because I was like, well, I want to know. And then it left, it stopped being nervousness and looking for cognitive rest, and then turned into like genuine being curious. Hey, I think this is God's world. How did he work this stuff out? This is a really good question. Let's go figure that one out and then talk to
Yeah.
someone about it, and just like you were saying, now I'm so much more confident and I could talk with the world's leading atheist philosophers. And I'm like, dude, yeah, you're probably way smarter than me, dude. But I just have a better position. It's not because of me being
Yeah.
super smart.
Right.
It's great. I'm fortunate, thanks to his providence. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. You're the genius in the sinking sand over there, my guy.
Yeah.
You know?
That's funny. Well, I want to talk about the bugs. So the, I think they're just arachnids, right? Or is there a
He
different?
calls them arachnids. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Are are they just bugs or, is there something else? I know some people there's a lot of weird critiques of the book. I think some are really good. I think some are probably not great. I think it's super easy to always point to the bad thing in the book and then call that the other and then point how that's racism or that's, whatever the flavor of the day is. But I just want to
Yeah.
get your thoughts. Like, what do you think the bugs are? Are they just bugs?
So, okay. So, I mean, let me take that a couple different ways. So, one, like, I guess I'm not a cynical guy when it comes to reading. Like, so I actually think this is a matter of conviction.
Mm,
And it probably kind of goes back to my apologetics slant. I think we should read people with goodwill.
yeah.
You know, like if I'm like I would want to ask a non-Christian to read like scripture with goodwill and say like, well, don't assume contradiction where there can be some sort of resolution, right? Now,
Mm,
and if I'm going to read the Quran or if I'm going to read the Hindu Vedas or something like that, I'm actually going to try to read to understand and understand it as they would have understood it, and not just assume like, oh, all this disagrees and is ridiculous and contradictory and stupid. And so, like, in the same way, like, I guess coming to a book like Starship Troopers, now, I don't know for sure. Like, maybe Heinlein had coded all kinds of racism into this book, and I am completely oblivious to it. But I just don't take it that way. I take these. Uh, I mean, I guess you could. Okay, I take these to be aliens, like that are different from us. They're sentient. They
mhm,
are a hive mind, which is fascinating. And I think thinking about the ethics of fighting a sentient people, so to speak, that are very different from us is a fascinating, like just about like a platform for philosophy to talk about just war theory in the midst of that kind of situation. It's a really fascinating idea,
yeah.
And I suppose you could try to apply this and say, well, people from the third world or something like that are lower life forms. And that's what I mean. I just don't see it. I just don't see it,
Yeah.
Um,
Also, what are you saying
that's not
about
my
those
take at
people?
all.
Yeah, like, what are you saying about like, are you telling us your own views when you're doing that? Like, "Look, it's
I know,
obviously
right?
third world," and you're like, "Ugh, do you think that they're aliens? Holy cow, dude." I don't if you're reading into it like that, you may be telling us more about your own psychology, maybe, and that's kinda gross.
Yeah, it's the same thing where, some liberal white woman is telling you that we need to make the SATs easier for black people because it's
Mhm.
racist not to. It's like, I'm pretty sure you just said black people are stupid and can't hack it, and that's not my
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah, that's wild. Um, what about, I don't know if these folks get a huge treatment, but, how about the skinnies? Like, what's the deal with them? Just another, like, is there anything deeper with the skinnies?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, like, again, I almost see the skinnies and the bugs as simply ancillary to the main story, right? Like,
Mhm.
uh, it's fascinating because again, you see just like just the prospect of life on other planets and how their societies would be different, but you get to know like nothing hardly
Right.
about them, right?
Mhm.
You know that their planet doesn't have as like big of a gravitational force as ours, and so they're taller, which makes me think of the Sorns from
Totally, 100%.
uh yeah,
Yeah. Out of
yeah,
the Silent
from
Planet.
C.S. Lewis's work.
Right.
So there's some things that are just interesting, but like he doesn't try to develop any of that. And I think that's intentional. They are just simply background noise. They're white noise for a story about a boy becoming a man.
Yeah.
You know what
Yeah.
I mean? So like I don't think we're meant in this story to read deeply into the bugs or the skinnies. He gives us as much as he gives us to just kind of make the story coherent and interesting and things like that. And I mean, it's interesting that the skinnies apparently were co-belligerents with the bugs at one time and switch over. And so, again, maybe you're like, oh, they're Russians. You know?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah.
Maybe that, I don't know, maybe Heinlein had some notion of that. And, um, but even then, it might have just been in the most cursory kind of way, you know?
Yeah.
Um, I don't know. Yeah, I refuse to ascribe ill will to what he was doing there because I have an argument from silence. I have no reason to think that that's what he was up to.
Yeah.
And again, I think like the very little time he devotes actually in this book to the two alien races he directly mentions. So you can almost argue it's interesting. There's only two. I mean, this
Yeah.
is an interplanetary federation, that's interesting. But I think the little time he devotes to it is very intentional because
Mm.
they are secondary to the purpose of the story.
Yeah. Yeah, that's such a great point right there. I love that. I think C.S. Lewis talks about this when he wrote a review for The Lord of the Rings, and at least for the Fellowship of the Ring. And in his review, he's like, "Look, this is good. It's good myth, and so it will hit you where you live most because it's a good myth. If you're really into political philosophy, you're going to see all sorts of allusions to the politics of the day and stuff like that. But if you're into religion, you're going to find it there. If you're into this, because a good myth will be able to do that kind of thing in a different way than an allegory would. And everyone just
Yeah.
bashes on allegory. But I don't know if I would call this myth or not. But if he's hitting on those, I mean, he's hitting on American myths that came out of World War One and two, and then even deeper in, after all the other wars that came, which have kind of built up these American myths. And if that's the case, then yeah, you could find a lot of different things from where you live most, but that doesn't mean that's what he had in mind, uh,
Yeah.
legitimate
Yeah,
or
we
not.
tend to read into everything we read. Like it's our
Totally.
natural our natural thing to do, right? Which is why like as students of the Bible, right, we talk about eisegesis versus exegesis, right? And
Hmm.
like we have
Right.
to really be intentional about not trying to put things into the text that aren't actually there, but to just mine out of the text what is actually before us. And I think if you with a goodwill come to Starship Troopers and do that, you'll find some things you disagree with, or at least I certainly did. Um, but it would be weird for me to. I think it's importing ideas in the book that are not clearly there.
Yeah.
That's what I
Yeah. I
thought
think
of.
you're right. I want to maybe end by talking about his mom a little bit. So I think this was intentional. It's a story of a young man becoming a boy, a young boy becoming a man, and he gets this letter from his mom. And I thought it was really fascinating the way Heinlein talks about it. That it wasn't until he got his mom's approval that he started doubting his position on being in the military. And part of that was just like a little bit of rebellion, saying, "I'm gonna do it anyways. You don't approve, but that part of that is fuel for me." And his mom's like, "Look, I love you, and there's nothing you can do to make me love you less." And that kinda, like, softened him because his resolve was partially built on rebellion. And I think that is actually part of becoming a man too, of finding good motivations that are not just rebel against, everything that's come
Mm,
before. But the letter was, like, overly, "Hi, sweetie. I love you so much," like, not regarding him as a man, and I wonder what the message is there, and then he ends up, spoilers for folks, go read the book, but, his mom ends up dying in an attack, and I wonder, like, what is that important for, the mythology of, boy becoming man to let go of your mom or something like that, or do you think that's just a plot point that's fun?
yeah, well, I mean, I do think that you make a good observation about how that sowed some doubt into him about what he was doing. And I do think it's obviously it's part of becoming a man to step out into the world on your
Mhm,
own and let go of the safety rails, which our parents are,
mhm,
and for boys, especially maybe their mom in certain ways. I think it's also really interesting though that you know he went into the military contrary to his father's approval in particular,
Right.
Um, and, again, spoiler, but like later in the book, as he's leaving the Roger Young, the ship that he's used to being on, he is going to go to officer candidate school. And as he's getting off the ship, he runs into his father,
Yeah.
who is now in the military. He's now a trooper just like him. And of course, they have a really kind of powerful moment of reconciliation or whatever. But it's just interesting, like that I don't have like that. Like yeah, he'd already gotten past the point where he needed that affirmation. I mean, maybe I actually really the point I guess I would make is that he got the affirmation he needed as a surrogate through Colonel Dubois.
Yeah.
Colonel Dubois stepped up like his father in that letter.
Which came right
Um,
after his mom's letter. Yeah, totally.
yeah, and but it's pretty amazing in that book to see he gets not only his father's approval later, but as high of an honor as a father could probably pay his son, was to say, "I actually wish I was more like you."
Mhm.
And that's why he went into the military. He's like, I didn't go so much just because your mom was killed and I wanted revenge. He's like, don't be wrong. Like, I want revenge, like that's something on my mind. But I went into the military because you did something that I should have done.
Mm.
Right. So I just think that's really powerful. To see that and to realize that, what Johnny needed, and desired most was not his mom's approval, was his dad's. And
Yeah.
when he didn't have his dad's approval, it took another man in his life acting like a father to kind of steady it out. And I thought
Yeah.
that was fascinating.
That's an amazing lesson. Yeah, I think that's super right. I don't know psychology stuff super well or sociology, but I have heard a study that I agree with, so I pass it on as if it's true, but I'm hoping it's true. That, yeah, it actually takes more than just, like, one dad in the house, but oftentimes, if there's a dad missing in the house, but there's a bunch of strong male presence, a strong male presence around in the neighborhood, it often covers that, and it still helps to develop young men when they have other role models. So it's not just one, you need multiple men, or if you're missing one, then multiple men can play that significant role. I don't know, you wanna, back that up? Have you heard that before? And we could pass this along as if it's
Yeah,
gospel
well, I
truth.
mean, I think obviously, I think we all need multiple mentors in our life.
Mm,
Um, and this isn't so much a pushback to what you just said, but I guess the
sure,
thing I would say is that I do believe that fathers are by far the most important man in any son's life.
sure. Yeah,
And so, although I think other men can step up and be there for a young man who's fatherless or functionally fatherless and can come through, all of that okay. Like, there's definitely no doubt that young men need a genuine father, even if, and again, even if it's not their biological father, right? Like, and for some of us, I mean, I had a great dad, but I have a great dad, I should say. But you know, I've known others. I've got good friends in my church who the only good father they ever had was our heavenly Father.
yeah,
And so I don't know. It is an interesting question, but I guess I think that one here's can I give another study that I heard about was one that showed that in families or where a young boy was raised in a single parent home with a mother versus raised in a single parent home with a father,
mhm.
far and away, actually, not just boys, but boys and girls, actually fared better with the single parent father homes.
Yeah, I've
Now,
heard that
again,
too. Yeah,
I don't know the data for that. There might be contrary data to that, but I just thought that was a fascinating study that I read some time ago. Um, but what we can absolutely be certain is that God designed young people to have a biological father and mother who love them and
yeah,
support them all the way through, right? So
yeah,
it's always a broken situation when one or both are absent.
yeah, totally. Totally, man. This has been awesome. Thanks so much for taking up this book and considering it in the as great books adjacent, and giving me that criteria for thinking through that, because I would not have read this without seeing you post about it on Substack. So thanks, man. That's huge.
Yeah, I'm glad to have encouraged you and others, and thanks for having me on the show.
Definitely. So, I'll put the link to your Substack, but, anything else you wanna, like, if people wanted to read more from you or hear more from you, where can they go to find your stuff?
Yeah, definitely Substack right now. STGB for Study the Great Books, stgb.substack.com. And on the very top of that, you'll find a pin post, which is kind of the directory of resources where you can dive down the rabbit hole of all that's going on there. And I am building a website, a secondary website right now, which will be studythegreatbooks.com. Not
Nice.
much to look at right now, but because in the next few months we will actually start selling physical print curriculum. So
Nice. That's fantastic. Yeah, I'll have to grab some of that. That'll be
yeah,
huge. Well, that's really cool, man. I'm excited to, see more of your work and, especially that resource you just talked about. That's, like, right up my alley, dude. I wanna get into that stuff too, so that'll be fun. Maybe we can, maybe I can coax you into coming back on, talk about Adler and the great book tradition some more sometime. That'd be
I'd love to.
huge. Great. Well, awesome. That's gonna do it for now, folks. This has been Parker's Pensies, and as always, all glory to God.